So if you guys could come to Minnesota at some point, this would get me up on a Sunday morning. This is not much will. Speaking of Minnesota, Jenny, way to represent. Nice job. It's excellent. Excellent to see. I know excellence always comes from Minnesota. It's great to be here. We flew in a little later than we thought we would yesterday, so we didn't get a chance to meet you all, but I imagine it was a great day. Celebration is, whenever there's a ceremony, and I consider this in and of itself a beautiful ceremony, whenever there's a ceremony, it not only builds relationships between the people that are participating in the ceremony, but it also creates, sort of aftershocks, and relationships build outside of it. And I have to say, I work with this woman every day. We've worked together for 3 years, but usually when we talk, we're talking about what's wrong. It's good? Okay. What's wrong? Are we selling enough magazines? How do we attract this or that advertiser? How do we get our circulation up? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? We don't really get a chance to know each other. And last night when we got here, we went over to Manhattan, and we had some Italian food, and we also had, according to the sign on the restaurant, the best cannoli on the planet. Not the world, not the country, the planet. And it was pretty good, I have to say. But anyway, I got a chance to, we got a chance to talk, and we're friends, but it's just nice to have that opportunity to really sort of celebrate what we do. So anyway, I would like this wonderful woman to stand. Amy Colliner is our sales manager. I was thinking back, I've been in alternative and independent media for close to 20 years now, and I remember the story that made me decide that I was in the right business and that I was doing the right thing with my life. And that is a story I did back in the mid-90s, and it was about a religious tension in the Hmong community in Minneapolis. Minneapolis has the second largest Hmong community in the world, or not in the world, in the country. Not the planet, the country. And the story was about how the first, second, and third wave of immigrants who had come over, some had been sponsored by Christian churches, some of them hadn't, and there was a tension developing between folks in the Christian and evangelical community, in the Hmong community, who wanted to assimilate, and then people who believed in the traditional ceremonies and rituals of the Hmong community. The religion of the Hmong people is hard to sort of pin down, but it's a combination of shamanism and animism and ancestor reverence. And so to do this story, I had an opportunity to attend a number of ceremonies. One of the ceremonies I attended was a funeral. This was an amazing celebration of life and hope and where the soul will end up next. And it lasted 3 days in this very large funeral home in St. Paul, and friends and family gathered. And one of the women told me that part of the ritual was staying with the body for as long as it took for the body to get from where it had passed to where it had been born in real time. So in this case, it took 3 days, I think. But it really opened my eyes at the age of about 26. It really opened my eyes to what a funeral can be and what a celebration can be. I come from a town in Wisconsin, and it's a little conservative, and so our funerals weren't exactly celebrations. This was a celebration, and it was really something special. The other thing I got to do, and I will never forget this, it's actually, I've done many stories, many feature stories, and had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in various communities, but I will never forget attending a healing ceremony at this home in St. Paul. We brought along a woman from a public television station who could translate, and it involved a shaman and a sick young woman. She had already tapped into some Western medicine and remedies, and she was going to be all right, but they wanted to follow through with this ceremony. It lasted several hours, and it was just, their sense is that the physical and the spiritual are intimately intertwined. And so the idea was to keep the soul in its proper place, find out what's wrong with how the sickness affected the soul, and to heal the soul. And after that ceremony, the woman from public television left, and I was there with a guy who I had never worked with before. He was a photographer named Mike Dvorak. And Mike and I were standing there sort of getting ready to go, and the family invited us to stay for a feast. And Mike and I looked at each other, and we realized there was just absolutely no way we could say no to this invitation. So we said yes. And we sat at a table with this family for several hours. None of us spoke the same language. Well, we didn't speak the same language as they did. The food was amazing. And we got to know these people through nodding, laughing, hand gestures. It was something special, and I'll never forget it. And I've since revisited that household several times over the years just to see how they're doing. The other thing that happened, speaking of these aftershocks, is that Mike and I, who had never met before, started working together. We started requesting to work with one another on different projects and stories, and we have since become the best of friends. I was in his wedding. We worked on several projects together. And I know that if we wouldn't have participated in that ceremony, we would not be together, we would not be friends. And so speaking of that sort of after effect, and that's the sort of thing that all of you are going to see happening as you're doing your various ceremonies. And I can't imagine the joy that that must bring you, and it'll be really, really fun. This story also convinced me why I wanted to be a journalist. Charlotte and I were talking on the phone about, what exactly I would say and would talk about. And one of the things that just came to mind is storytelling, the importance of storytelling. And, I could have gone into daily journalism, I could have gone into broadcast journalism, and I fell into alternative print journalism. And the reason that I fell in love with it, and it happened with this story, and it began to happen over and over again with stories that I did, is that I got to really concentrate on a subject and a community and a group of people for long periods of time, 2-3 months at a time, working on a story with a photographer, meeting people, getting entrenched in the community. And the reason that I think that's important is because, the mainstream media and the media in general gets a lot of flack these days, and they deserve a lot of flack, but at its best, what I believe media and storytelling and journalism should be about is bringing the world closer together. And the world comes closer together by telling other people's stories. And our goal at Utne Reader is to introduce people to ideas, to people, to communities that they wouldn't have ordinarily been introduced to. And hopefully by doing that, we get people to think a little bit outside of themselves and think more empathetically, because I really believe that true moments of enlightenment are accompanied by empathy. And I think that is something that you don't see a lot of in sort of the blogosphere or, in the headline news. But I've had the really good fortune to work with people who let me do that. At some point along the line, however, and I was working for an alternative news weekly in the Twin Cities owned by Village Voice Media, so you kind of get a sense of what it was like, that sort of paper. And I really loved the work, but I found myself more and more feeling like there was too much cynicism, too much sensation, too much of an effort to find a good guy and a bad guy, or a good woman and a bad woman, and then put them against each other. And even if it didn't really exist, there was encouragement on the part of the editors to do that. And I really wanted something different. And speaking of celebrations, I was on the west end of Vancouver for no other reason but that I went up there with my partner to see some jazz. I was sitting at a bar about 2 in the morning on the west end, and a woman tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Karen Olson, who was then the editor of Utne Reader. And we had only met a couple times, but there she was. And they were having a magazine award, the National Magazine Awards for Canada. She said, "You should come with me and join this group." So I went over there and met all these people, and of course they're celebrating their awards, so they're all in a fabulous mood and welcoming. And I got to know all these great editors, and I got to know Karen really well. And 6 months later, she sent me an email and she said, "I want you to come and work at Utne." And what Utne Reader represents is the very thing that I felt was missing from the alternative newspaper I was working for. And that is, our goal is to be very real about what's going on in the world, to be realistic about the problems we face and the challenges that we face down, but also to give people hope, to give people ideas, to tell people stories and introduce our readers to people like you who are out in the world making a difference, touching people's lives, making the world a better place. And so I just, all of a sudden, there I was. And at the time, the magazine was owned by Eric and Nina Utney, who forged the first relationship with the Celebrant Foundation. And they had their own ceremonies in the office. We used to cleanse the meeting room once a month with incense. As a cynical alternative journalist, I initially had some problems with that, but I came to really enjoy it. And we also came to celebrate each issue, and that's not something that happened where I was before. We took the time to get together as a group and talk about what we had accomplished and to get ready for what was to come next. I really learned a lot from that. When the Utney family sold the magazine 5 years ago, they were also going through a really tough time. They were going through, Eric and Nina were going through a divorce. And they chose to have a divorce ceremony. And I see Eric once a month. Eric is gracious, and he still, I see him as a mentor, and I get to have breakfast with him once a month. And I remember him telling me about this, because it was, any divorce is tough, obviously. And they have 4 children together. It could have been just a really rough and tumble thing, but instead they got together as a family. They celebrated the family they had created, the good times that they had had, the magazine they had put out together, the traditions they had started in the media. And they live 3 blocks apart right now. They celebrate holidays together. They both have their respective partners. But to see that, to see somebody go through a divorce in that way really opened my eyes again to the importance of celebration and what you all do. In a couple of weeks, we will be doing our own ceremony at Utney Reader. We're having our Utney Independent Press Awards. And we do this every year. We nominate 64 magazines in the various categories, and we award them a little trophy. And this year we're doing it in San Francisco. And one of the things that happened just this last week, people were responding to say whether or not they could come to the reception, and one of the magazines that was nominated had been nominated a year ago. And the editor of the magazine told me that they were part of a nonprofit, and the nonprofit was meeting to decide whether or not the magazine should continue to publish. We've all had difficult times publishing. Economic times are rough for magazines. And at the time that they were meeting, they really felt like that's the way they were going to go. They just felt like this magazine's just not making a difference. People aren't seeing it. It's not making that much of a difference in terms of getting our mission out there. And they received their letter, and believe me, this is a humble award ceremony, but they got their little letter that we made up in the office saying you're an Utney Independent Press Award nominee. And the editor told me that that changed everything. That just being recognized for what they did by their peers in just this little way, being told, hey, there's people out here and you're doing excellent work and your work matters. It changed what was going on in that board meeting, and that magazine's still around today. And not only are they around today, but they're a nominee once again. So that made me feel better than anything in recent memory, honestly, associated with the magazine. It just made me feel really good to know that just that simple ceremony and that gesture, that award, made such a huge difference to those people. And that's what all of you are going to be doing. You're going to be touching lives. You're going to be inspiring people. And I don't think it's possible to even have a sense of what those aftershocks will be and how many people you will affect, not only in the moment of the celebration, but throughout time. And for that, you should all be very proud. I'm proud to be asked to be here, and good luck to you all.